The Galactic Empire, vast and unyielding, ruled the cosmos with an iron fist. 1,000 worlds, each more advanced and diverse than the last, had fallen under their control, their cultures assimilated, their resources harvested. To the Empire's leadership, it was an undeniable truth. No species was beyond their reach. And among the many, humanity had always been considered a curiosity, weak, unremarkable, and far too afraid of war to ever pose a genuine threat. As the Empire's flagship vessel, the Resolute, drifted silently through the void, its captain, Marius Zykov, surveyed the galaxy's latest conquest. He was a man of great pride, whose unshakable belief in the Empire's superiority had guided his every decision. He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowed as the holographic displays of human colonies appeared before him. Each one was marked with the same status: pacified. Mankind, he believed, had no taste for war, only for peace. An ironic weakness, considering the chaotic nature of their history. They had yet to build a military fleet capable of interstellar combat. They relied on primitive, outdated technologies, and even their own internal conflicts were more often verbal than physical. To Zykov, humanity was a species with one defining trait: fear. "Send word to the Council," Zykov commanded, his voice steady but laced with the unspoken expectation of victory. "Let them know that humanity has been brought to heel. Their resistance is fractured, their will to fight non-existent." The officer standing at attention saluted and turned to deliver the message. Zykov's lips curled into a faint smile as he leaned over the bridge's console, his fingers tracing the smooth surface of the map. The Empire's territorial reach had never been more complete. Meanwhile, on Earth, the story was far different. The once great nations of humanity, fractured and fractured again by war, had learned to adapt. Global peace, though precarious, had been established through the combined efforts of diplomacy, technology, and the unrelenting will to survive. Humanity had evolved, no longer focused on petty territorial disputes or ideological divides, but instead on their shared fate in an ever-expanding universe. They had developed the means to defend themselves, but they had done so quietly, subtly, without making a show of power. And in doing so, they had given the Empire a false sense of security. In the heart of the United States, one man was about to change everything. Colonel Jackson Jax McLean stood atop the observation deck of the Orbital Defense Station, watching as the Empire's ships loomed over Earth's atmosphere. His jaw tightened. To the Galactic Empire, this was just another exercise in expansion. To him, it was personal. McLean wasn't like the politicians or diplomats who advocated peace with the Empire. He had fought in the wars before, the old wars, and had seen the devastation they wrought. He knew that peace with the Empire wasn't an option. You couldn't reason with a beast that only understood strength. He had heard the whispers in the corridors of power, the same ones Zykov believed. Humans are afraid of war, they said. They are fragile creatures, content to bend and break rather than fight. But McLean had learned long ago that underestimating humanity was a grave mistake. A mistake the Empire would soon regret. McLean's mind flashed back to his time as a Special Forces operative. The bloody, grueling campaigns, the precision strikes, the long hours spent behind enemy lines. He had seen firsthand the brutal efficiency of human soldiers, their ability to adapt and innovate when pushed to the edge. The Empire might think humanity was weak, but McLean knew better. And now, the time had come to show the Empire just how wrong they were. "McLean," came a voice behind him. He turned to find Lieutenant Sarah Vaughn, a sharp-minded officer who had served with him through multiple operations. "They're asking for you in the command room. The Empire's fleet is in position." McLean nodded and followed her through the long hallways of the defense station, his boots clicking against the steel floor. As they entered the command room, a tense atmosphere settled over the group. Holographic maps displayed the Empire's fleet in precise detail, vast, imposing, and seemingly invincible. But to McLean, the sight of them stirred something else, a simmering rage. The Empire's arrogance, their belief that humanity would cower in fear, was something he could not let slide. "We've been given a choice," Admiral Sharp said, his voice steady but laced with frustration. "Either we surrender and submit to their rule, or we prepare for war. There is no middle ground." McLean's eyes narrowed as he glanced at the map. "Then we fight," he said flatly. "We've been building up our forces in secret for years. We're ready. We may not have their technology, but we've got something they don't." "And what's that?" Sharp asked, raising an eyebrow. "Ruthlessness," McLean replied, his voice low, almost a growl. "We don't fight because we're forced to. We fight because we know what's at stake. The Empire doesn't understand that. They think they can win this with sheer numbers, but they're about to learn something they'll regret." He turned and left the command room, his mind already racing with strategies. The war would be brutal, no doubt. The Empire's forces were immense, but McLean had always believed in the power of the underdog. The human spirit, when pushed to the brink, could outmatch even the most advanced technology. And the Empire had made a mistake, a fatal one, by believing humanity was weak. As the first waves of Empire ships began to descend toward Earth, McLean looked out the observation window once more. He could feel the weight of the coming conflict, the weight of humanity's future on his shoulders. But he didn't flinch. The fight was just beginning, and he would ensure that the Empire's arrogance would be its undoing. The humans were ready, and now so was he. Colonel Jackson McLean had always believed in the simplicity of war. It was a game of strategy, tactics, and sheer will. His background in special forces had drilled that lesson into him. And now, as he prepared to face the largest military force humanity had ever encountered, the truth of it rang louder than ever. The Galactic Empire was not a force to be taken lightly, but McLean didn't have the luxury of underestimating them. He understood that any hesitation, any misstep, would cost humanity everything. The vast expanse of space seemed indifferent to the swirling chaos below. Earth had never seen such an imminent threat, and yet there was a calm about McLean that made him seem like the only man in the room who wasn't overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the enemy. He stood in the heart of the orbital defense station, the hum of machinery echoing through the metallic walls. Outside the station's panoramic windows, the enemy fleet loomed like a great dark cloud, seemingly intent on blotting out the stars. "Ready for your briefing, Colonel?" Lieutenant Sarah Vaughn's voice broke through the quiet hum of tension. She was one of McLean's most trusted officers, a brilliant tactician in her own right. Her sharp eyes met his with a focused intensity, as if she, too, understood the magnitude of what was to come. "Always," McLean said, offering a brief but confident smile. His calm demeanor was contagious, and Vaughn returned a small, appreciative nod. She knew the odds were stacked against them, but McLean was a man who had faced worse. Much worse. Vaughn activated the holographic display at the center of the room, revealing the Empire's fleet in all its terrifying grandeur. Hundreds of warships, each one more advanced than any human craft, filled the screen, their cold, mechanical precision contrasting sharply with the heat of the human rebellion that was about to ignite. But it wasn't the ships themselves that concerned McLean. It was the mentality of the soldiers behind them. "Humanity's only chance," McLean muttered under his breath, his gaze fixed on the Empire's vessels, "is that they don't yet understand what we're capable of." Vaughn shot him a sideways glance. "What are we capable of, Colonel? We've seen their firepower. We know they've got the technology edge." McLean turned to face her, his expression hardening. "We've got something they don't, Sarah. We've got the drive to win. We fight to survive. They're just soldiers who follow orders. They don't know what it means to fight for your home, your people. That's something you can't train for." His voice was steady, but there was an undeniable conviction behind it. The American spirit had always thrived on adversity, and in that adversity, McLean saw his advantage. The Empire might have the numbers, the technology, but humanity had something far more dangerous, an unyielding determination when cornered. The briefing began, with McLean's mind darting between strategy and instinct. He knew they couldn't match the Empire's ships in direct combat, not on paper. But the fight was never about paper. It was about finding the cracks, exploiting them, and turning the tables when the enemy least expected it. The Empire's weakness, as McLean saw it, wasn't their strength. It was their arrogance. They believed humans were weak, soft, unwilling to fight in the brutal ways that the Empire had grown accustomed to. And in that belief, they had underestimated the one thing that had carried humanity through every war, every conflict in their history: their ability to adapt and endure. "We need to hit them where they're not looking," McLean said, his voice low, but cutting through the murmur of the room. "We know their tactics. They'll assume we'll fight in a traditional manner. Head-on battles, fleet engagements. But that's not how we'll win this. We need to draw them out, make them chase us, force them into unfamiliar territory." Vaughn nodded thoughtfully. "Ambushes, decoys, guerrilla tactics?" "Exactly," McLean said. "We'll take their strength and use it against them. Our fleet is smaller, but we've got the advantage of being unpredictable. They'll never expect us to fight dirty. And that's exactly how we'll win." As the meeting continued, McLean began to outline a series of calculated strikes: hit-and-run raids on Imperial supply lines, disruption of their communications, and covert operations to sabotage their command structures. It wasn't about beating the Empire with force alone. It was about breaking their resolve, making them question whether the effort to conquer Earth was worth the cost. As the briefing came to a close, McLean felt a stirring sense of purpose. The fight ahead would be unlike anything humanity had ever faced, but it was a fight they could win. He wasn't just leading a military campaign. He was leading a revolution. He was fighting for Earth, for humanity's place in the galaxy. And if the Empire thought they could intimidate him with their vast fleet, they were about to find out just how far a man could be pushed before he snapped. In the days that followed, McLean's orders were put into motion. The human fleet, though vastly outnumbered, began to deploy in a way that confused the Empire. Ships moved in unexpected patterns, vanishing from the Empire's sensors only to reappear in the most unlikely places. Sabotage operations crippled Imperial logistics, and covert teams infiltrated enemy lines, leaving chaos in their wake. The first wave of attacks was a success, small victories that added up. The Empire, though powerful, was starting to show signs of frustration. But Zykov, aboard the Resolute, remained confident. He believed humanity's tactics were nothing more than a desperate attempt to delay the inevitable. The humans, after all, had no true power to fight back against the Empire's might. He was wrong. For McLean, the war was just beginning. And with every strike against the Empire, his confidence grew. The humans were no longer fighting for survival. They were fighting for their future, and that made all the difference. The Empire's response was swift, as expected. The initial raids had thrown them off balance, but the Empire's leadership had grown accustomed to swift retribution. They were a vast, well-organized machine, built on the unrelenting power of their advanced technology and disciplined troops. And now, they were intent on proving that their superiority could not be undermined by mere tactics and human tenacity. Captain Marius Zykov stood on the bridge of the Resolute, his arms folded across his chest, his expression unreadable as he stared at the holographic map of Earth's defense grid. His fingers traced the paths of the human ships, which seemed to appear and disappear at will, frustrating his officers with every fleeting encounter. They were running circles around him, or so it seemed. Zykov, however, did not believe in chance. "Alert all fleets," Zykov commanded, his voice sharp and firm. "We will bring an end to this charade. The humans think they can outmaneuver us, but they forget one thing." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the cold, sterile air. "We are the Empire. We control everything." He had always been confident in the Empire's ultimate power. Their superiority was built not just on their technological edge, but on their certainty. The belief that no species could challenge them without falling into line. And yet, these humans, these primitive creatures, refused to bow. They were more resourceful than Zykov had anticipated, and more defiant than any species he had encountered before. The first true test of humanity's resilience came when McLean orchestrated a strike that sent shockwaves through the Empire's ranks. The attack had been swift, targeting one of the Empire's key supply stations located on a desolate moon near Jupiter. The humans had used a combination of stealth technology, precise intelligence, and well-timed strikes to cripple the station, cutting off vital supplies to the Empire's frontline forces. The result was immediate panic. For Zykov, this was the moment of realization. Humanity was no longer simply playing at war. They were becoming a real threat. The Resolute S sensors had detected the source of the attack, a small fleet of human vessels, the likes of which Zykov had thought inconsequential. They were nothing more than converted civilian ships, hardly equipped for a fight. But they had shown ingenuity, and in that, Zykov saw something far more dangerous than he had bargained for. On Earth, McLean's victory was met with cheers, but the celebration was short-lived. McLean knew that the Empire's response would come quickly, and it would be brutal. They would not tolerate this kind of setback. His mind raced through the possibilities. The sabotage of the supply station had been a victory, yes, but it was a small one. The Empire's response would be swift and overwhelming. He needed a plan for that. In the quiet of the command center, McLean stood over a series of tactical maps, his brow furrowed in concentration. The defeat of the supply station had dealt a blow to the Empire's forces, but it had also made them aware of humanity's capabilities. He couldn't afford to rest on his laurels. Now, he had to prepare for the inevitable retaliation. "We need to hit them before they can retaliate," McLean said, his voice low and steady. "We know their supply lines are vulnerable now. If we can disrupt their operations in the outer colonies, we can stretch their resources even thinner." Lieutenant Vaughn nodded, her eyes gleaming with the same fierce determination that had been present in McLean's every order. "You think they'll overextend themselves, Colonels?" McLean's lips curled into a grim smile. "I know they will. They'll be too focused on retaliation to see the bigger picture. We just need to keep hitting them where it hurts." It was a dangerous strategy, but McLean had never been one to play it safe. The Empire might have superior firepower, but they lacked the flexibility and the will to endure the kind of guerrilla warfare humanity was now engaged in. He had learned long ago that it wasn't about meeting the enemy on their terms. It was about making them play by yours. As the weeks passed, McLean's predictions came true. The Empire, enraged by the sabotage of the supply station, began sending increasingly large fleets to Earth's defense perimeter. The Empire's pride, wounded by what they viewed as a humiliating defeat, clouded their judgment. Zykov, in particular, seemed determined to prove that no human force could challenge the might of the Empire. Humanity, however, was playing a different game. McLean's forces struck the Empire's outer colonies with calculated precision, disrupting trade routes, crippling manufacturing centers, and sabotaging key Imperial outposts. The Empire, spread too thin, had no choice but to commit more and more resources to putting out the fires humanity had started across the galaxy. Zykov, frustrated and furious, ordered a massive assault on Earth, hoping to crush the resistance once and for all. The Empire's fleets surged forward, their weapons primed, their commanders eager to deliver the final blow. They would not be outmaneuvered again. In the heart of Earth's command center, McLean stood before a massive digital map, his mind racing. The Empire was coming, and it was coming fast. He had expected this. Their retaliation was inevitable. But the question was, could they survive it? Could humanity endure the oncoming storm? "Give me the fleet," McLean said, his voice firm. "We're not going to wait for them to hit us. We're going to make them regret ever coming this far." Vaughn moved quickly to relay the orders, her hands flying across the control panels. McLean turned to face her, his gaze unwavering. "Make sure the civilians are evacuated," he added, his tone softening just slightly. "We can't afford any more casualties. This fight's not just for us. It's for everyone." Vaughn met his gaze and nodded. "We'll make it happen, Colonel." And then, as the Empire's fleet descended on Earth, the stage was set for humanity's greatest battle. The storm had come, and the question was no longer whether humanity could survive, but whether the Empire could. McLean knew the answer, and he was ready to prove it. The Earth's atmosphere burned with the fiery streaks of incoming ships, their enormous silhouettes casting long shadows across the planet's surface. For the first time since humanity had been thrust into this war, the realization hit. This was no longer a skirmish. This was the final confrontation, the moment where the Empire would either crush humanity's will or face an uprising unlike any it had seen. McLean could feel the weight of history pressing down on him, a force as palpable as the earth beneath his feet. He stood at the helm of the command center, the cold metal walls surrounding him like a tomb. In front of him, the display screens flickered with data, Empire fleet numbers, projected trajectories, and defensive countermeasures. His eyes flicked over the numbers, his mind calculating, recalculating. Every decision now mattered, and each one carried the potential to tip the scales. "Colonel, we've received the final communications from the outer colonies." Vaughn's voice broke through his concentration, sharp and precise. "The Empire has committed every available fleet to this assault. There are no reinforcements on the way." McLean's jaw tightened, but he didn't flinch. "We expected this. We won't get another chance." He turned, meeting her gaze with the unflinching resolve that had been the hallmark of his leadership. "How are our defenses holding?" "Not well, sir," Vaughn said, her voice betraying the concern she had been trying to hide. "We've held them off with guerrilla tactics, but they've adapted faster than we anticipated. The Empire is focused on Earth now, and their fleets are pushing through every resistance we've set up." McLean's fingers clenched around the edge of the command table. They had pushed the Empire to the brink. They had made them bleed, but now Earth stood at the cusp of destruction. There were no more tricks, no more distractions. This was it. "We need to slow them down," McLean said, his voice low but steady. "Disrupt their command chain. Find their weak points. It's the only way we can buy enough time for the final phase." Vaughn nodded. "I'll mobilize the strike teams." She turned to relay the orders to the tactical division. As she moved away, McLean stood alone for a moment, allowing himself a brief moment of reflection. The Empire's might was overwhelming. Their ships, their technology, their resources, they had everything humanity lacked. But McLean had one thing they didn't: the resolve of a species fighting for its survival. And that made all the difference. The hours dragged on as McLean and his team worked tirelessly, coordinating the movements of the remaining human fleets, each ship a desperate counterattack against the advancing storm. The Empire's forces, vast and seemingly invincible, continued to press forward, relentless in their pursuit of total domination. Yet, despite their numbers, they had underestimated the human spirit. McLean's next move was a risky one. He ordered a small squadron of ships, decoy vessels, into the heart of the Imperial fleet. Their mission was simple: draw the Empire's attention, cause confusion, and keep them distracted long enough for the main human fleet to make a stand. It was a dangerous gamble, one that could cost the lives of every pilot involved. But McLean was willing to take that risk. If there was one thing humanity understood, it was sacrifice. On the other side of the galaxy, Zykov stared at the holographic map of Earth's defenses, his face hardening as he watched the human ships moving erratically, almost as if they were toying with him. His frustration had reached a boiling point. The humans had been an enigma from the start, their unpredictable tactics and refusal to surrender both baffling and enraging. They should have folded by now, or at least begged for mercy. But as Zykov's eyes narrowed, he recognized the pattern. The human fleet was scattering, trying to lure the Empire's forces into a trap. It was a classic tactic, one he had seen before in the old wars of the past. But this time, he was not going to fall for it. "Signal the fleet to hold formation," Zykov ordered sharply. "We are not chasing ghosts. Prepare for a full-on assault. Bring their defenses to the ground." His officers hesitated for a moment, sensing the urgency in Zykov's voice. But there was no time for second-guessing. The Resolute and its accompanying battle cruisers moved into position, their weapons powering up. The final assault was about to begin. Back on Earth, McLean watched as his decoys engaged the Empire's ships, drawing fire from every direction. His fleet, now scattered in smaller groups, took full advantage of the confusion. The decoy ships exploded in a brilliant display of firepower, but it was all part of the plan. They were buying time. "We got 2 minutes until they realize what we're doing," Vaughn reported, her voice steady despite the tension. "We need to make it count." McLean nodded, his face set in a grim expression. "Prepare the final phase," he said. "Launch the first wave." The human fleet, now hidden in the asteroid belt, emerged from their positions, their ships sliding into place with deadly precision. The decoys had done their job, causing just enough confusion to give the humans a fighting chance. But as McLean's flagship, the Vanguard, led the charge toward the heart of the Imperial fleet, the reality of the situation hit hard. The Empire had finally understood the trap. Zaikov's voice came through the comms, cold and imperious. "You're out of time, human. Surrender now, and I will show you mercy." McLean's lips twitched at the absurdity of the offer. "You don't understand, Zaikov," he muttered to himself. "This isn't about mercy." The first volley of fire from the Empire's fleet rang out, striking the Vanguard's shields with the force of a hammer. The ship rocked violently, but the shields held, shimmering blue against the onslaught. McLean's grip tightened on the console. "Full speed ahead," he ordered, his voice unwavering. "We fight, or we die trying." The human fleet surged forward, a torrent of fire and fury that would either break them or be their salvation. The final phase had begun, and as the first sparks of battle ignited, McLean couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the brink of something far greater than just a fight for survival. This was humanity's moment, their stand against a force that thought them weak, that underestimated their resolve. But McLean knew one thing: they were ready. The battle raged with a ferocity that shook the very foundations of Earth's orbit. For McLean, every second felt like an eternity. His hands gripped the controls of the Vanguard, the ship shuddering under the Empire's heavy bombardment, its shields flickering dangerously close to failure. The vast expanse of space around them was alive with explosions, the occasional burst of plasma lighting up the darkness as human and Imperial ships clashed in a brutal ballet of destruction. "Status report," McLean barked, his eyes never leaving the screen, where the swirling chaos of war unfolded before him. His officers scrambled to answer, their voices a chorus of urgency. "Shields are holding at 30%, Colonel," Lieutenant Vaughn called out, her voice steady but edged with anxiety. "We've lost 2 frigates in the last minute. Imperial ships are relentless." McLean's jaw clenched. Every loss hurt, but the stakes were too high to allow himself any doubt. The Empire had underestimated humanity from the beginning, but now the time for surprises was running out. They had done everything they could to disrupt the Empire's plans, but now, in the heart of the battle, there was only one choice left: survive or perish. "Hold them off," McLean commanded, his voice calm but carrying the weight of a leader who knew his people depended on him. "I need another 30 seconds." The next few moments seemed to stretch endlessly. The Vanguard dodged another barrage of energy blasts, its engines roaring as it veered sharply to the right, narrowly avoiding a collision with an Imperial destroyer. The ship rattled under the stress, but it held together, its powerful engines pushing them deeper into the heart of the enemy fleet. "Colonel, we're getting a signal from the decoy fleet." Vaughn's voice rang out again, a rare note of hope cutting through the tension. "They've triggered the EMP. The Empire's systems are starting to glitch." McLean's eyes narrowed. "Now's our chance." With a quick command, the Vanguard shot forward, weaving through the chaos as the human fleet began to press the advantage. The Empire's reliance on advanced technology was now working against them. Their communications were scrambled, their targeting systems malfunctioning. The tide had begun to turn. But McLean knew it was only a matter of time before Zaikov adapted. The Imperial commander was no fool, and this temporary setback would not last long. The Empire's strength lay in its ability to regroup, to reassert its dominance quickly. McLean's forces had only moments before the Empire regained control. "All ships, focus fire on the lead destroyers." McLean barked. "We need to cripple their command vessels now, before they can recover." The human fleet moved with the practiced precision of a force that had learned how to fight a war on their own terms. Frigates and cruisers maneuvered through the scattered remnants of the Empire's fleet, their guns blazing as they tore through Imperial ships. The Vanguard darted between enemy vessels, its weapons flashing in rapid succession. McLean's heart pounded as he watched the screens. This was a fight for survival, and every shot counted. As the seconds ticked by, The tide of battle seemed to shift in humanity's favor. The Empire's fleet was becoming disorganized, its once imposing formation starting to break apart. McLean's eyes flicked over the sensors, watching for any sign of a counterattack. And then it came, a new wave of Imperial reinforcements arriving in the nick of time. Massive warships, their hulls gleaming like steel behemoths, emerged from the shadow of a distant asteroid, their weapons primed for another barrage. The Empire had brought its full might to bear, and McLean's pulse quickened. "We got incoming. Larger ships, Colonel." Vaughn's voice crackled with urgency. "We're not going to last much longer at this rate." McLean's mind raced. The battle had turned in their favor for a fleeting moment, but now they were on the cusp of losing everything. The new Imperial ships were too much. They were too powerful, their firepower overwhelming. The Empire was throwing everything it had left at Earth. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," McLean ordered, his voice steady despite the rising pressure. "We're going to make them regret this." The vanguard broke away from the heart of the battle, leading the human fleet on a series of harrowing turns, dodging blast after blast from the incoming Imperial ships. But even with their speed and agility, McLean knew they couldn't keep this up forever. Every maneuver burned precious energy. Every dodge pushed their shields closer to failing. In the distance, Zykov watched with a cold smile, his hands clasped behind his back as he observed the destruction from the bridge of the Resolute. The Empire's reinforcements had arrived, and now it was only a matter of time before Earth would fall. He had anticipated this final struggle. He had expected the humans to fight with everything they had, but in the end, they would break. The sheer weight of the Empire's superiority would crush them. They would bend the knee, or they would burn. "Colonel McLean," Zykov said, his voice a low growl over the comm, "you have fought well. But it's over. Surrender now, and I promise you that your people will be treated with mercy. Continue this, and your species will be wiped from the galaxy." McLean's grip tightened around the console, his breath steady. Zykov's arrogance was his greatest mistake. The Empire had relied on its technological dominance and its belief in their unassailable power, but McLean knew the truth. The battle had never been about their ships or their weapons. It had been about the will to survive, and humanity's will was unbreakable. "Do your worst, Zykov," McLean replied, his voice calm and resolute. "We won't surrender. We'll fight to the last." With a deep breath, McLean issued the final command. "All ships, prepare for the final push. We break them now." The human fleet surged forward once more, charging into the heart of the Empire's forces, weapons blazing, shields barely holding as they fought for their survival. And in that moment, McLean felt it. The heart of humanity, pulsing with every strike, every defiant shot. This was no longer just a battle for Earth. It was a battle for their future. And as the warships clashed again, McLean knew one thing with absolute certainty. They would never give up. Not now. Not ever. The final battle unfolded in a kaleidoscope of violence. The shockwaves of exploding ships rippled through space, their light momentarily drowning the vastness of the stars. McLean's hands shook with the intensity of the fight, but his resolve remained as unyielding as steel. The human fleet, battered but unbroken, pressed forward with everything they had left, knowing that this was their last stand. If they didn't succeed now, if they couldn't break the Empire's final wave, Earth would fall, and with it, humanity's future. "Status report?" McLean barked, his voice cutting through the cacophony of alarms and voices. He didn't look away from the view screen, where the remnants of the Empire's once mighty fleet hovered like vultures waiting for the death knell of their prey. "Shields down to 12%, Colonel," Vaughn answered, her face pale but determined. "We've lost contact with several of the outer ships. The remaining forces are too scattered to form a cohesive defense." "Hold steady," McLean muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. The word steady felt like a lie, but it was the only thing he could give them now. He wasn't sure how long they could hold out, but they couldn't stop fighting, not when they had come so far. The vanguard shook violently as another barrage from an Imperial dreadnought slammed into its already weakened shields. The sound of the ship groaning under the impact was almost deafening, and McLean instinctively braced himself against the console, his body pushed into the seat as the ship careened through another wave of energy blasts. The Vanguard lurched and twisted, but McLean fought to regain control. He couldn't let it break. He couldn't afford to lose their symbol of resistance. "Colonel," Vaughn shouted, her voice edged with urgency. "We got a new development." McLean's eyes flicked toward her, barely able to mask his concern. "What is it?" It's the Empire's command ship, the Dominion. It's coming straight for us. They're going for the kill shot." McLean felt his stomach drop. The Dominion was the heart of the Imperial fleet. If they took that ship down, they might have a chance to cripple the Empire's remaining forces. But if it reached them first, if they didn't stop it, "Prepare to launch the counterattack," McLean said, his voice steady despite the rising panic in his chest. "We need to take out their lead ship now." "Yes, Colonel," Vaughn replied, already relaying the orders to the fleet. "All ships target the Dominion." The human ships, barely holding on by the thread of sheer will, adjusted their course, swarming toward the behemoth that had emerged from the wreckage of the earlier battle. The Dominion was a fortress, bristling with weapons and defensive systems. It would take everything humanity had left to bring it down. McLean's heart pounded in his chest as the distance between them and the Empire's flagship closed. The Vanguard's damaged engines roared, barely maintaining its speed, and McLean could see the incoming barrage of plasma fire streaking toward them like a storm of destruction. His eyes narrowed as he gave the command. "Full power to the forward weapons." McLean ordered, his fingers tightening on the controls. "Bring their shields down." The human ships fired with all the fury they could muster, the weapons flashing brightly in the darkness of space. The Dominion's shields flickered but held steady. The gap between the two forces closed rapidly, and McLean felt the tension coiling in his chest like a spring ready to snap. "Shields at 8%, Colonel," Vaughn called, her voice strained. "We won't be able to take much more of this." "We've come too far to stop now," McLean said, his voice a low growl. "Push forward. Full power now." The Vanguard surged forward, its weapons flaring with deadly intensity. In the blink of an eye, the Dominion fired, its colossal guns hurling a beam of destructive energy toward the Vanguard. Time seemed to slow as the beam raced toward them, but McLean didn't hesitate. With a sharp command, he veered the ship to the left, narrowly dodging the blast. The Vanguard was grazed, the outer hull scorched, but it remained intact. "Brace for impact," McLean shouted as the enemy dreadnought fired again. This time, they wouldn't be so lucky. McLean could feel the inevitable as the ship shuddered violently. But then something unexpected happened. Another human ship, a small cruiser that had been fighting in the fringes of the battle, barreled in front of the Vanguard, absorbing the blast that was meant for them. The ship was obliterated in an instant, its sacrifice buying McLean's ship a precious few seconds. Vaughn gasped. "No, they're gone." McLean's throat tightened as he watched the explosion, the blinding flash of light consuming the small cruiser. They had given everything, and in that moment, it was clear that humanity was fighting not just for their own survival, but for the survival of every soul on Earth. "All ships, focus fire," McLean shouted, his voice strained with emotion. "This is it. For Earth." The human fleet, ignited by the sacrifice of their comrades, gave everything they had left. Their weapons pounded against the Dominion's failing shields, and slowly, agonizingly, those shields began to crack. The Imperial flagship groaned under the strain as energy blasts exploded against its surface, tearing through its hull. With a final, deafening roar, the Dominion's shields failed completely, and the Vanguard's weapons found their mark. The flagship of the Empire erupted in a blinding explosion that shook the very stars around them. For a moment, there was silence, an eerie, reverent silence in the wake of the destruction. McLean exhaled shakily, his chest heaving with the weight of what had just transpired. The Empire's heart had been torn out. The human fleet, battered and broken, had struck a blow that would echo across the galaxy. But even as the Dominion burned, McLean knew this was not the end. There would be no surrender. The Empire would not stop. But for the first time, They knew it could be defeated. The fight wasn't over, but humanity had proven that they were no longer afraid of war. They would win,